Welcome everyone. This is a teacher workshop. It is a the purpose of our talk today is about how teacher training and teacher development needs to be differentiated. And when we think about differentiation, we think about it for our students, right? But then as teachers, particularly in a hybrid or micro school, you can't just say, oh, they know how to teach, and then, give it to them. There needs to be a process, there needs to be training, particularly because we are such a highly specialized environment. My name is Sharon, and I lead St. John the Baptist Hybrid School. I'm also a teacher there. I teach all the science classes for high school, and then we have our panelists over here, which will also come up and introduce themselves. And so I will introduce them in just a few moments individually. But starting from the right, that is Priya Johnson. Then we have Susan Gonzalez. We'll have Lori Diamond, and then Lindsay O'Daniels, and they will talk about themselves, and they'll have slides about themselves shortly. Okay, so you may be asking the basic question, which is, are hybrid and microschool teachers really actually different? Because should we be doing things differently when we're training teachers? And so all of this came from the National Hybrid Schools Project, which they have published a couple survey results. And so they surveyed hybrid schools, and they found that 13.8% of hybrid school teachers have a degree outside of education, English, and biology. So take a snapshot, I guess, of what you think is your standard public school teacher, and most likely you're thinking they have a degree in education, they have a degree in English, they have a degree in science or something like that, right? And then they go to teach that in the public school system. Well, 13.8% of hybrid school teachers don't have any of that, that kind of background for a degree. Hybrid school teachers do have fewer years of teaching experience compared to a conventional private school. 32% of hybrid teachers did not take part in any student teaching experience prior to starting in a hybrid school. And then a majority of hybrid teachers they feel as though they are able to make an impact on what they're teaching, their curriculum, the performance standards, in comparison to your standard public or private school. Majority of hybrid teachers feel a sense of satisfaction that they can do something different with their curriculum and that they can have better control over what they're teaching. That someone's not telling them, you must teach this, you must teach that. And then 95% of hybrid teachers feel that they're doing something together, that it's a cooperative effort with other staff members. That's pretty high, 95%. I don't know that we have something like that in a public school system. So obviously, if we're a little bit different, if we're looking at hybrid and micro school teachers as if they are different, then you want to start off with what are your goals, right? Because we do this for our students. We also want to know, like, what are our goals for our students? And so some sample goals that you might have for your teachers could be, you want them experienced in classroom management. You may have a physics expert who teaches at the university, and then when he walks into a classroom, it's total chaos, and you can't get them to sit down. That may be something you have to work on with that particular teacher. So you may want for them experience in classroom management. You may want them to be very good at lesson planning. You may want them to be proficient in an online teaching environment. You may have, for your school, you may have an online requirement, and then they need to know how to use that system, right? So it's going to be specific to what your school is like and what you want for your teachers. You may want them to be a content expert. I kind of feel like that's a good one too, right? You don't want to have someone teaching grammar and they don't know how to, they don't know grammar themselves. They don't know how to teach it. So you want them to be a content expert. I think that's most of what people are looking for. And then ability to adapt to different teaching methods, because that adaptability is something that is very crucial to a hybrid and micro school environment. So differentiation for teachers. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about looking at their background, looking at things that they're good at, and being able to figure out what we need to do to fill in those gaps. And so you might want to ask some of these questions. Do they have prior teaching experience? We have at our school, we have a teacher who was an engineer before. She had not taught math before going over to a co-op. And so did that mean that she should not be a teacher, a math teacher at our school? Not at all. Like, just because she didn't have prior teaching experience in a classic setting does not mean that we should just discount her as a teacher. But it does mean we might have to do a little bit more work to be able to show her how teaching in our type of a classroom works. So you may want to ask, do they have prior teaching experience? What is their background? For her, as an example, this engineer who was teaching math, if I were to ask her, which I did ask her this year to teach physical science, there were certain chapters that she was just like, this is not my normal stuff. This is not what I'm used to. And so I needed to do a better job of preparing her for that and making sure that she was prepared to teach those chapters. It was outside of her usual background. And then what experiences have they had in a hybrid microschool before? We have some teachers that, particularly on this panel, that came from another hybrid school. So do we really need to go into a lot of different hybrid teaching techniques for someone who has that experience? Probably not so much. Are they familiar with the curriculum? If they know the books already very well, let's say they homeschool their own children and they use those books, it's going to be easier for them. And so you may not need to spend as much time working with them on particularly those books that they already know well. And then what are their interests? It's really important that you catch what it is that makes it fun for them. Nobody likes to be in a room and the teacher just cannot stand what they're teaching. That is just the worst. You can tell. You know when they're teaching something that they do not love. And we want them to share that love of teaching with their students. So some of the ways that you can differentiate would be shadowing, professional development, mentorship, and networking. And these are some of the things that we're going to kind of focus on today, particularly the networking at the very end. We started doing teacher shadowing about 2 years ago, and it's good to have them come in and shadow a class that's already being taught. If you know that a certain teacher is leaving and you're going to try to fill their spot, having a new teacher come in and shadow them for a day really gives a lot of context as to what their job would be like, right? So teacher shadowing is really good. Professional development, we did not have professional development when I started our school, and then eventually, the teachers told me it would be nice to have some professional development, and over time we have developed now professional development quarterly. And it's a great way for the teachers to get together. It's a great way for the teachers to expand out into areas that they want to learn more about. And then the mentorship program we also started was it last year? This year, last year, not sure what year we're in at this point, but we started the mentorship program. It's very new, and we had to have a whole policy handbook about it. It was way more complicated than I realized, but they meet, I also want to say quarterly, right? Mm-hmm. So quarterly meetings between the mentor and the mentee, and I'm not involved in that because oftentimes they don't feel like I, as the boss, can be, that they can come to me with some of their biggest concerns, right? Sometimes you don't want to tell your boss, I don't understand what I'm teaching, or things like that. You want to, and I'm not saying that they're saying that, but you want them to be honest. You want them to really come forward and say, what is the problem, and I really need help with this. And that's hard to do, I guess, sometimes with your boss. So I kind of step out of that, and I let the mentors and the mentees really work together. And then the networking is super important, which is why we're all here now. Our professional development, what I have found is in-person and hands-on is definitely the best. But then, this is the modern age. We've had probably more Zoom sessions than we have had in person. And sometimes it's just because the teachers have their own children at home and we can't provide childcare and it just gets too complicated. You're able to get more participation, I feel like, sometimes with a Zoom session, a 1 hour Zoom session, than telling everyone, okay, meet on a non-school day at school and leave your kids at home. You know, sometimes that's challenging for hybrid schools. So we do more often probably do Zoom, but in-person and hands-on is definitely good. And then professional development, we've done different things from year to year. We don't really repeat our professional development, at least we haven't yet at this point. We're on year 5. And I asked the teachers, or I have been asking the teachers, what would you like to have as your professional development? The last one, I sent out a survey asking them what they would like for professional development. I really oftentimes am unexpected, or it's not what I was expecting. Essentially, I think I've got a sense of what the teachers want, and then I send out a survey and they tell me what they actually want, and I'm like, wow, that's not what I thought, you know? So it's good. You sometimes don't realize what it is that they're interested in and what they're asking for until you ask for it. And so surveys are the way that I have found is best for that. Our hybrid started in 2019. We had no PD for probably 2 years or so. I think about year 3 is when we really started having it. And then the mentorship program, pairing that experienced teacher with someone new. The hybrid school survey that I showed you at the very beginning, half of the hybrid school teachers were assigned a mentor their first year of teaching. So I think that's a good thing. That seems like, particularly because hybrid and microschools are such a different setting, it's really good to have that mentorship, because even if they're a super experienced teacher and they've done so much and they've got many different things on their CV, it's not, sometimes you don't realize that they have gaps, and they don't realize that it's a very different environment until they're in it, and then they've got a couple weeks in, and sometimes they're like, well, this is not what I expected. And then, so we've gone to quarterly sessions now with an experienced peer. All right, these are our 4 teachers. So Lindsay's gonna come up first. She's 4th grade language arts, math, and history. And then we'll have Priya, Lori, and Susan come up.
Hi, my name is Lindsay O'Daniels. I'm really honored to be here with you today. My path into teaching was very traditional. My mom was a PE and health teacher at an all-girls Catholic high school. And as a young kid, on days that my school wasn't meeting, I often went with her to her school. And seeing like her joy and her excitement of interacting with her students and with their coworkers, I knew from a very young age I wanted to be a teacher as well. So I went to the University of Texas, where I got my degree in elementary education. I was in a cohort with a group of about 20 other students, and we did 2 different semesters of student teaching as part of that. So it was all in of like, I want to be a teacher, and that's what I was doing. From there, I went to the University of Florida, and I got a degree in reading education. And then I moved a little bit south and got my first teaching job. I worked there for 4 years where I taught 2nd grade and 3rd grade. And then I transitioned into Atlanta. And I got a job at a brand new charter school. And kind of the dynamics of switching from the Florida school to even the Georgia school was completely different. It was a new way of teaching, new different types of students. I went from teaching a 2nd grade class where about 60% of my students had repeated kindergarten or 1st grade. And of those students, they were all special ed except for one, which was on consults. And then when I moved to Georgia, I transitioned to a 5th grade classroom where my entire class was gifted or tag except for 2 kids. So even kind of being in the public school system, you know that you're teaching all sorts of different types of students. While I was at the charter school, I also helped out with their ESOL program and helped develop that. I kind of got transitioned into that role and realized that wasn't what I loved. And so I moved back into a different public school where I taught 4th grade. At that time, I also went back to get my specialist degree in educational leadership. I ended up joining St. John the Baptist. I left public school when I was pregnant with my son, and I knew I wanted to stay home. So I kind of transitioned out of the public education system, stayed home for a couple years, which I loved with my kids. But at the same time, I really miss teaching. Like, I love teaching. I love being in the classroom. I love working with students. And so after my daughter was almost 1, I started trying to figure out how can I get back into being a teacher in education without having to go back full time. Because I still wanted that flexibility to be able to stay home with my kids, but I miss teaching. I wanted to be there. So I happened to find St. John the Baptist, and when I met Sharon, I probably had this much knowledge about homeschool and absolutely no knowledge of hybrid teaching. It's like, okay, that sounds great. I don't really know what I'm getting into, but I've grown to love it. I've been there for 5 years. And it's the best. I mean, I love it. And even though I've had kind of the formal training as a teacher, transitioning into teaching as a hybrid teacher, that's been a whole kind of shift too. So these are kind of my 3 tips that I feel like have really helped me as a teacher succeed in our hybrid environment. The first one is communication. And I know all of my professors throughout my education have always talked about how important communication is with parents. And I think in a hybrid setting, it's even more important because I see these students twice a week, and the other 3 days, their parents are doing the lessons and doing things with them at home. So in this setting, I feel like it's even more important that my lesson plans are their routine, they know what's coming. I'm very specific in my lesson plans. We utilize our online platform, and so I they know when the tests are coming. They get into a certain routine, so they kind of know what's going to happen each week. And I think that helps with that consistency at home as well. I make sure before I post lesson plans that I double check everything, that if there's links to videos that are working, if there's handouts or resources they need, that it's all there so that they can be successful when they're on their own. And the other piece is I make sure to communicate with parents if I think their child is struggling. You kind of have to do it right away. And it could be that they're struggling with a certain skill or content, and it can also be that they're not completing their work. That's kind of been something new to manage too, is that they're doing things at home, but then I'm also expecting them to keep up with that. And I think it's important that as soon as kids start getting behind, that I'm there saying, do you need help? What's going on? What can we do to fix this? And we're working together as a team of parents, students, and teachers. My second one is slow and steady. We're in here because we care about kids and we're entrepreneurs and we want to change them. And I think a lot of us get in with like, these are all the brilliant things I'm going to do. And then it's overwhelming because you don't do any of them really well. And even as a teacher, I'm already like, oh, next year, I can't wait. I'm going to do this and this and this. And I have to kind of take a step back and be like, okay, focus on one thing. What is the one thing I want to do this semester with my kids next year that I want to change? And so, slow and steady. Don't get too overwhelmed with all these big pieces. They'll come together. And like Sharon said, we didn't have professional development until like the 3rd year. We didn't have parent workshops. We didn't have field day, all these kind of things. They eventually added on. And so we've kind of added, perfected, and then added something else up. And with that is to make sure that you're analyzing and making sure that those things that you're doing, do you still want to continue them? Because, you start to get into things like, oh, it didn't work. Well, let's take that off. Or let's add this. Or what do the parents and the students want? And it really depends on what your mission and vision is, where you are headed, and the things that you want to add to your curriculum. And then last is kind of know your community and staff. Really get to know your parents, your families, the grandparents, the teachers, and really draw on their strengths to add to your school. There's so much at our school we wouldn't have been able to do if we hadn't tapped in to like the wonderful resources of our parents and things like that. We've been able to have different classes offered. Susan teaches Spanish. She's a Spanish speaker. Like, hey, why don't you teach Spanish for this? Parents, the same with that. We were talking about, there's a parent who was a science teacher, and like, can you come and help us with this? So drawing on all of those kind of strengths of what your community can offer so that you can offer more things at your school. My class the other day was talking about languages, and one of my students was like, I really want to learn French in high school. And And I was like, you know what's really cool about at our school? We can do that. Like, we don't have it right now, but if that's something you want in a few years, like, we will make it happen. We'll figure out how to meet that need. Same with teachers. We're lucky in like this hybrid setting that we're not micromanaged. And so when teachers come with ideas of, I really want to do this, I want to try this, we kind of have that free reign to be able to do that. Sharon's super supportive, like, yes, if that's what you're passionate about, do it. And then that's kind of the way we've kind of built all the extra like fun stuff that you get to do in the school. And with that, Priya's going to add on to that piece, especially about knowing your students.
Good morning. Thank you guys for being here. I'm Priya Johnson, and all the things that we hear about the traditional pathway to a hybrid teacher, I'm here to just kind of destroy that because I have no sense or one reason. Quick question, first of all, how many of you are teachers? Raise your hand if you would. Okay. How many of you are administrators? Okay, quite a few. How many of you are in higher ed? Higher ed, excellent. And how many of you are homeschoolers? All right, so homeschoolers, how many of you, 10 years? Raise your hand. 20 years? All right, great. This is a great audience. We have a wonderful mix. So let me tell you about how I wound up here. So I've kind of an unusual route here to being a teacher at a hybrid school. This is my, I don't remember how many years now, 5, 6 years that I've been doing it. And I have some formal education background that led me here that may be kind of unusual. I kind of broke a little of the things that, that Sharon had said at the beginning, that they don't have degrees in English. I do. A couple of them. And then they don't have degrees in education, actually. I do. One of those as well. But really what I learned formally in education got pretty much dismantled when I had my own children. And my oldest child said to me, I want to learn this. And I said, no, that's like physics. And she's like, so. And I was like, alrighty then, let's look at that, let's study that. And she was like 4 at the time, so I was like, I'm gonna have to learn how to do that with a 4-year-old now, so I don't know what I'm gonna do with that, but I had to figure it out. So how did I start teaching? My teaching experience, I spent all my time in college every summer working with this phenomenal lady who had spent 45 years teaching kids who were in need of remedial help for reading and also gifted kids. So I got the entire range of experience. It was a really wonderful way to spend my summers. I was at Purdue and I took education courses in children's literature. I taught their children's literature course, introduction to education courses, student teaching experiences. It was an interesting thing to get on a school bus with 35 college students to take them down to the Indianapolis public schools and have them in the public schools all day long. My teaching was on the way to school and then on the bus ride back, which was an hour and a half. So it was a different kind of experience there. We had a Holocaust educational program at Purdue that I got to be a part of, meeting the authors, the speakers, and also going out to the public schools with them. So it was a little bit of a different experience. My husband got a job down here in Georgia, and so we moved down here, and I worked at KSU for a while as a children's literature instructor there as well. And then here's the other piece of it. So I've been homeschooling now for 23 years. So I have a little bit of all of you in me, and so my heart goes to all of you in what you experience. Hybrid and co-op teaching experience, specifically 18 years of elementary through high school, classes in everything from history, literature, composition, essay writing, religion, science, and robotics. I had never had any notion to be doing robotics. I did do biology a lot in my undergrad, but robotics wasn't my thing. But when your kid says, I want to maybe do this, and you say, okay, and had a fantastic run with that for about 4 or 5 years of running robotics, helping kids to do that. So what is my thing for you guys? First of all, as you notice, it takes a special kind of crazy to do all of those kinds of things, but when your kids want it and the students love it or want to engage, you try to do that. So this is an odd collection of pictures, but I think that pictures tell the story, so I'm just going to share those stories with you. In my current class right now, I have a kid who wants to be an engineer, absolutely wants to be an engineer. I have a kid who wants to be a cardiologist, already knows it. She's in 7th grade. She's like, cardiology is the way to go. I'm glad, we'll probably need her, right? I've got a kid that when he came in, the only thing he cared about was crewing. He crewed, and that was his love, his passion. I've got a girl who does Irish dance, international competition Irish dance, okay? I've got one who wants to be a cosmetologist. I've got one who's a jack of all trades. Anything that looks remotely broken-handed to this kid, he'll probably hand it back to you. One that all cares about is basketball. I've got one whose family deals with a lot of medical history, medical issues, and that's a huge part of what impacts their life. I've got one who has had family members who have been in the military and have had PTSD, and that's actually really prevalent in their family life. A real mix of people, right? And so in this real mix of people, I have to say my number one thing is invest in these people. You have to get to know your students so you can be invested in their success, and they have to know you're invested. That makes all the difference for me in the teaching and learning that happens in my classroom, is that they know I'm invested. So how content area has to be there, but how do we know that we're invested? I can do this, I have to say, because of the hybrid environment. My class sizes are small. I have a big class. I have 16. Okay, that's not going to happen in the big schools, right? And so 16 can be really loud and can be really exciting, and a lot of good things can happen. But I have that flexibility because of the class sizes are small. I also have a couple of other things that happen in a hybrid school like ours that doesn't happen everywhere else. I have taught some of these kids older siblings or younger siblings. I have taught some of these parents are friends of mine. I have known them for years. I have taught my colleagues' kids sometimes, so it's a different environment to have that kind of community being there all the time. So at St. John's, we also have this fantastic notion that we should always be collaborating with our colleagues. That's something else that's different in a hybrid situation. Because when we say colleagues in a traditional school, we mean our faculty, right? But when we're talking about a hybrid school, it's not just going to be our faculty, the teachers, it's going to be the parents, because they're only with us 2 or 3 times a week. The rest of the time, our colleagues are our parents who are also teaching at home. And so we have to have communication with them about what's going on. So that's another group of colleagues that we don't usually think about, but they do have to matter in a hybrid situation. And the way that shows up for us, we have this phenomenal group of ladies, some of them are here with me. They're very dedicated to what they do, and they show up for each other's things, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But the third group I'm going to talk about in a moment that we don't usually think about, but in a hybrid situation I think are really relevant, are student mentors. In a small community like ours, the older kids are going to mentor, and we should tap into that for the younger kids. You guys all know this if you work with younger age kids. When the big kid pays attention to them, it's huge, right? If the high schooler comes down to the elementary school classroom and does something with them, that's a big deal. It just makes, they get tired of looking at me and hearing me, but hearing that junior in high school come down and do something with them, that's exciting. So how does this work out? So we have these fantastic language arts teachers. So from my background, you can see history and literature, and those things are kind of my background. I'm the science teacher for 7th, 8th grade right now. Okay, it makes no sense. But it works great at our school because we have these great language arts teachers that do things like we're having National Book Week, and they come up with things like, we're going to have a school-wide deer time. And when we say school-wide deer time, these teachers show up with their books, and they're reading. And if you're Lindsay, you show up with your buffalo hat with horns because it's also Wacky Hat Day. And it works because the kids love seeing that. We have things like, we have a poetry cafe, Miss Diamond does. And the kids write their own poems, and then they have to come and perform the poem in front of an audience, right? So they're very nervous about it. It's very personal. It's their poetry, and they have to share it. And it seems like a class activity. It doesn't really matter with anyone but the class, except that we make it, oh no, it's a public thing. Parents come in. And then I had students come and say this, so I want to tell Lori this is important too. When the science teacher shows up and the math teacher shows up for the poetry cafe, the kids are like, huh, so this isn't just important for language arts? I mean, the science teacher thinks this is important enough to show up, the math teacher thinks it's important to show up. It makes a difference in how the kids feel, okay? So definitely all of that going on. We have a lot of student memberships. We have a student counselor at our school, and they are always helping to facilitate things for the other children. And that's kind of cool because we take a step back, we help mentor them a little bit, but they're the ones who do it. And that makes a difference because it's the older kids being there for the younger kids. It creates a different kind of community. When we had our Reading Buddy Day, we have kids that are reading to their younger students, some of which, this is my friend's little sister or little brother. It's a different kind of community. It makes it gel just in a different kind of way. So that's something we love. And so collaborating with colleagues, but what you think of traditional colleagues are a little different in our system. My number 3 thing, rarely does these trips, is be as hands-on and real-world as possible. Now that seems very self-evident, except I think it is even hyper necessary in a hybrid school environment because you're only with them 2 or 3 times a week. In my case, I have science twice a week. Twice a week, I get them for 1 hour. Occasionally we do field trips and that is a blessing, but it doesn't always happen that way. So I only get them for 2 hours a week. I can't waste that time. I can't waste their time. They've got to want to say, I'm gonna go to science because something cool is gonna be happening there, okay? So what kinds of cool things happen? They need to see science in action. They need to see it matters, it makes a difference. We used to have this furniture. We're at a school, we're at a church that we rent space out from, and in my science classroom, there was lovely-ish furniture that I don't know how long had been there, but my kids, don't touch that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about that, don't touch that. And then when we got to my science class this year, I said, let's see what's actually on that couch, shall we? And so they went and they swabbed toilet handles and seats and doorknobs and the outside of their water bottles and this couch and all this kinds of stuff. And things grew. We documented that growth. And you might think this might be the worst, and it might have been the couch. You wanna know what's worst? Outside of a kid's water bottle.
Yeah, that's right.
That was the worst thing.
Wow.
But we told the pastor of the church, hey, look, we did this science and we swapped this couch. The couches were gone the next day. Okay, science in action, it made a difference. Something different happened there. So that was kind of cool. When you're working with middle school kids, they're middle school kids, okay? So what they're interested in is gonna be a little bit different. You gotta make motion for that. So we're studying the body systems this spring. So the way that I did the body systems thing was a little bit different. I basically said, we are going to do body systems, but I'm not gonna teach it. You are. Now I'm gonna model it for one body system, and then you guys are taking it over. And I paired them up, and I said, give me what my desire would be for a body system, and if you're lucky and you ask for it first and nobody else wants it, I might give that to you. And if you don't get it, that's not fair, it's okay. And then I told them, and in order to teach it, you have to do everything I will do in my first body system, which is going to be skeletal, right? Let's build with our bones. And I said, you will have to create a PowerPoint to teach the kids the basics of structure and function and all these things. What's the latest innovative science that's happening with that body system? You're going to have to create a poster we can put up in our classroom so they can reference that material again. You're going to have to come up with an interactive activity, and you're going to have to create an assessment of your classmates' learning, okay? And I'll model it. I'll do the first one. So I have a kid in my class. Came in at the beginning of the year, was convinced he was not very smart. And to make sure that he could be protected in that, would tell his colleagues in the class that he was not very smart, and would tell his teachers he was not very smart. But he loved what he did outside of school. He was passionate about it. So that was my job, to make this kid realize he is smart and he can do things. So how do I do that? This kid loves crewing. I looked up his crewing club. I found out who his coaches were. I read what their philosophy was. I started talking that to him in class. What'd you say? Isn't that what your coach tells you? Yeah. Get to this body project, and I'm telling them they got to do all this, and he says to me, Mrs. Johnson, can I be your partner? And I was like, well, I don't usually take on students as my partner. I'm going to do this. He goes, but I could be a good partner. I said, think about it. So at the end of class, I go to him and I said, were you serious? He said, yeah, I want to be partners with you. I said, you realize if you partner with me, you're going to do 75% of the work. He said, okay. I said, the PowerPoint, you create the PowerPoint. There's a template for everybody, but 3 of those slides your partner has to present, so you need to tell me which 3 I will do. He said, okay. I said, the poster, we'll work on it together. If you're going to do all the PowerPoint, I'll work on the poster. He goes, no, I'll do the poster. Okay. And I said, and it needs to be you. It needs to matter to you. So how are you going to make that work? He cares about crewing. we're doing the skeletal system. He had slides in his presentation that talked about how the biomechanics of growing happens. So that's the kind of thing you have happen. You have, we were doing urinary system. Okay, so we talk about the urinary system, and they do all their presentation. The renal system is basically what it is, right? And then at the end, what do we end up with? If your pee is a different color, why is it that color? Okay? This is what middle schoolers want to know. Okay? So we make sure we learn what the middle schoolers want to know. We have a kid who's interested in cosmetology. We talked about the integumentary system, about nails and hair and skin. And when we got to that, we said, well, you can tell health things from looking at the way your nails are. Discolorations matter. That's what doctors will use in order to do that. So we took photos of all of our hands to see if there was things we could learn about vitamin deficiency. Yeah, my kid doesn't eat vegetables. I'm sorry. It's not a good thing. And then we went off on that, and I did a little just something funky. I knew there was one person who wanted to be a cosmetologist, so I sent all the girls out of the room for a minute, and I asked the guys, I said, guys, which kind of nails looks good? And they're like, seriously? I'm like, yeah. And so they circled all the ones they thought looked good. Okay. Then the guys went out to the playground, and I put the girls back in. I said, girls, which nails look good? And they're like, oh, they had a lot of opinions on that, right? They had a lot more choices, too. The guys came down to slightly long, kind of blunt, very limited. The girls had a whole different idea. I'm like, who are we doing nails for? I'm not sure. But this was an interesting little experiment. So all of that happened. The whole point in doing all of this was to try to be as hands-on as possible, right? To make them want to come in and do something different in our class, and they remember it when they leave, right? So in this project, one of the things that we had was the integumentary system, and I had this kid who loves to do computer stuff, loves to learn how to do it better, okay? That's his passion. He wants to be an engineer. And he said, what do they do in college? And I said, what do you mean what they call it? If they do a poster in college, what do they do? And I said, oh, let's take a look at that. So we looked at samples of college presentations at conferences. What does that science poster have to look like? I can't tell you the hours this kid put into this poster, designing on a vector graphics program. I did not ask him to do that. And I asked him at the end, I said, I'm kind of scared to ask you, but how many hours did you spend over the course of, and mind you, I told him about this project in December. And then starting in January, they started doing these things. So they had all of them at least minimum 1 month that they could be prepping themselves into it. And he said, oh, I don't know, I'm like, 5, 8, I don't know. He's like, probably about 10 hours. And I said, wow, just so we're clear, I did not assign him that kind of work. He took it upon himself, okay? But he wanted to, so that was good. So I'm going to show you just a really quick video. It's only about a minute 30, minute and change. That what I think is most important, this number 3, is making it worthwhile. So hopefully this will come across. Okay. I want to look for what this is. You see the water is actually been. All right, let's see that sodium, madam.
So Lori Komodo, thank you, and she'll let you know her background and what her 3 tips are as well.
Yeah, I didn't see her tips, so some of them were kind of
A little
echo,
over.
but that's okay. Yeah. So I will say, well, my path, which you can probably tell by looking up there, hybrid teaching was anything but linear. As I was kind of doing this, I realized it was inevitable. I just didn't always see it. So some of the key points in my path. My mom was a parochial school teacher for 25 years, and I said, I want to major in education, and my dad said, I don't think so. Witnessing mom's work, he said, it's a low-paying job. It requires you not only to work all day, but you have to do lesson plans at night, and you have to take continuing education classes, and you're arguing and testing with parents. It's a thankless job. So despite my mom's affirmations that, no, it was not thankless, I got a degree in international marketing and a minor in economics. Upon graduation, I found myself substituting at my elementary school before I finally landed a job in corporate insurance. But my career in insurance actually found me educating. I had to educate coworkers about some syndicate EPA claims, which were making their way known in the 90s. I also had to educate our insureds on a daily basis. I volunteered with our company's adopted elementary school, so that fed my passion for working with children. After marrying, my husband's overseas posting allowed me to become a counselor for the Fulbright Commission. I continued that stateside with the NGO administering their scholarships. However, finally, I was gifted with my own instant microschool by having twins. I quit. I became a full-time teacher, and I loved it. Oops, wrong page. Sorry about that, skipped 2 pages. So what I did was I started volunteering. I started substitute teaching. I started talking to teachers, and I'm learning about their concerns, and reading and studying. And I started looking at getting into education, but I wanted to stay home with my kids, so I did. But my children tested gifted, one had ADD. I started to want to look at ways to keep them challenged, but also to keep them engaged, and so I did more and more research. As a result of all the volunteering and substituting research I was doing, I volunteered to do things which incorporated lesson planning. So I did a differentiated K through 8th plan for our school on Turkey during Memphis in May, which incorporated looking at one country. I did this lesson plan with arts and music and history and religion and culture, and it was K through 8th. When my children's 5th grade science curriculum was lacking, I proposed solutions to the principal based on the Virginia Standards of Learning and the Educated Child by William Bennett. As a result, our principal joined me to start our school's Science Olympiad, which I said yes. Subsequently, I was invited to participate in the National Catholic Education Association's assessment and 5-year development plan for our school. I'd also begun master's level courses in education because Virginia had a pathway for non-education degree holders to get an education certification. But then we moved to Georgia, where no such pathway existed. While discerning a way forward, we learned about a nearby homeschool. We enrolled our daughter, and I became a part-time TA and was there for 6 years. While doing that, I continued to substitute both there and at traditional schools. I completed online courses at Classical U. I continued researching, and I learned much through observation and discussions with the teachers I was teaching with. In substituting, I was able to apply what I was learning, and I found out what worked and, more importantly, what didn't. What motivates me to teach is the idea of helping children understand learning isn't a series of subjects in silos to be memorized and regurgitated. It's the excitement of watching students come to understand the synthesis. What fuels my desire is the drive to help students appreciate the good, true, and beautiful in our world and how it informs and shapes their quest for meaning. As I'm sure you all have experienced, the joy of witnessing the light of recognition flicker in their eyes, the excitement with which they approach material, and watching them love to learn something they previously disdained, that supports me through the year. So here are some tips that I have gleaned
through years of research, observation, and application. The first one is, which Priya had touched on, was bring real-world relevant connections to curriculum. Bring in articles showing application of principles to the students are learning. Use historical references to help students relate to material and put it in a broader context. Show how real people engaged with what it is they're learning. Share and discuss pieces of art that tie into the lesson. And use all these methods to connect with the student's personal interests. So, for example, that student that Priya talked about with a military background, at the beginning of the year, they were doing World War I in history, so I started doing World War I in literature. They had to learn the Charge of the Light Brigade. They had to memorize it, and they had to recite it. And I can tell you that young man, when he was reciting it, you could tell he loved it. You know, bullets to the left of me, bullets to the right of me. He was all in. And then I was able to explain, like, how literature changed, how people's ideas changed about do it all, die for country, to World War I, and wait a minute, this isn't what we were thought we were going to do in the trenches. This is not the glory of war, and how poetry came out of that, and how men were writing poetry. And that really keyed into the boys in my class who probably, let's face it, are not going to be into poetry. But it's like, no, this is how these boys processed what was happening, and this is also how they were able to sneak through things to their family through the censors by using poetry. So using these things to show how real people live those experiences. My second one is teach for mastery, tailored to the student when possible. So evaluate each student individually, easier to do in a hybrid with smaller class sizes. Communicate with the parents often. As Priya said, they are our eyes and ears 3 out of 5 days. We need to determine what factors might be hindering them, especially in their home environment. Learn about their home environment. Is it organized? Do they have a desk? Are they on the kitchen table? Where is it their learning is taking place? Do they at least have a calendar? Do they have a place to track their assignments and when things are due? How much support are they getting? I will tell you, in middle school, I find an incredible drop-off. I'm surprised how many parents, especially with boys, will tell me, oh, he's in 7th grade now. He's old enough, he can handle it all on his own. I'm like, oh my gosh, 7th grade, that's when it falls off the rails. And so you really have to help educate your parents about that special time and really emphasize what's going on at home. Also, be aware of each student's effort and circumstances and provide mercy for retakes and extra help accordingly. When I say be aware of their effort, it's because retakes can also be abused. So you have to make sure they're not just like, well, I know I can fail that first test because I've got my backup. So get to know your students, get to understand them, what they're doing, the effort they're putting in. But at all costs, do not let students move on. So if they do poorly on a test, they don't just get to slide and keep going. It's like, no, you come back here. If I've got questions, even on a homework assignment, and they haven't fully answered the question, I'll hand it back to them. And I'll say, I really want your thoughts on this. I really want to know what you think on this. Get it back to me next class. I don't let them escape not answering or answer poorly. It's like, that's not with me. The final thing is expect excellence and let the students know it. So give the students a metacognitive insight, which is easier to do with older students, granted. Explain their mental development to them. Let them know that their development aligns with your expectations. Let them know their brains are capable of the work required with effort, and that they will acquire proficiency and they will achieve success. Avoid telling the students they're smart. That's a static judgment. It doesn't allow for growth, and if they don't feel smart, they're not going to believe you anyway. Tell them they have good brains. If God gave them good brains, and if they work, they can grow that brain just like any other muscle in their body. Use Socratic discussions whenever possible. Like right now, what I'm doing here, this is anathema to me, okay? Like you guys, I should be peppering you with questions, and you should be coming back to me. I don't like to lecture. Provide opportunities for students to teach each other. Let them explain concepts to their peers. If someone's struggling, ask somebody else. Ask a friend. Don't ask me. Ask a friend to help you explain it. Share the interpretations and their creative work with each other. Like the poetry, share that. When we have discussions about what you've read, I want to know what they think about what they've read. And I'll guide the conversation with, did you think about this, or did you notice this metaphor, this symbolism? And then they take it and run with it. And a lot of times they will come up with symbolism that I didn't even see. And so it's actually a lot of fun, more fun, to listen to them than to tell them the prescribed answers. So that's it. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And next I'm going to ask Susan to come on up, and she's going to talk more on that.
So I think what you're noticing is that they do all have some variations in their background, although they all came to teaching in a hybrid. And the idea is that we're trying to show you that hybrid school teachers are definitely unique, and that they're in hybrid and micro schools because they're passionate about it. And as you can see from all of what they're saying here. So Susan is our first grade teacher.
And I'm apropos, the retired one. So allow me to introduce myself. I am Susan Gonzalez, and I have been an educator for 30 years. 30 years, 25 in special ed, and 5 in a hybrid school. I have to tell you a cute story. Let me just move this before I forget. But the story's not there. These are some of the topics I'm going to cover. The accomplishments, intentions, and challenges in assessment. And then I'll talk a little bit about being retired. But the cute part, before I move on about getting into the hybrid situation, was a very random situation. I had been in special ed, and I retired, and I was sitting there reading the Georgia Bulletin. And all of a sudden, because I missed the kids, I'm like, oh my gosh, this thing of staying home is for the birds. So I said, wait a minute, I need that. But when you're retired, government, you can only work a certain amount of hours. So I'm like, oh my gosh, what can I do? So I'm reading the Georgia Bulletin, and there is a little thing about this big, not even an inch, and as you can see, I need reading glasses. So part-time job for math and language arts, and here I am. So my passion is in fostering growth, because I was special ed, and I always had to be behind the students, pushing them. And, after a while, it gets a little bit tedious, the IEPs and the assessment and the data collection. And actually, I do have a second job. I'm an interpreter for Fulton County, and that's what I do. I interpret IEPs. And it's the same thing, data collection and data and data on their goals and objectives. But, when I get into the hybrid school, yes, from hearing the conferences and everything, there is a lot of do's and don'ts, but there's more do's. So, just like Priya said, accomplishments. Their accomplishments are my accomplishments. And how do we get them? By providing our little friend who is in a curling sport. Is that the word? Crew. I speak Spanish. But I have his little sister in my Spanish class. She's in kindergarten and he's in what grade?
Seventh.
And I know all about that because she has to tell me everything about how he gets wet and how he does it every day and things like that. But the good news is he's able to do that because of the hybrid setting. And I have a little Irish dancer. I've had this little one since she was in kindergarten, and now she's in second grade. And they travel all over the world. How can they do that? Because of the hybrid setting. And then I have another little boy who's our storyteller. He comes every Wednesday. He writes books. He writes mysteries, and then to sit with my first graders, and they are captivated by him. But he's also, how can he do that? He is in a hybrid setting. Plus, he knows Italian because as soon as school's out, they go off to Italy and they spend the whole summer there, and then he comes back. And he's taught the kids to say words in Italian and he incorporates it then in his little stories. I'm not going to go through all this, you could just read it, but I'm going to talk, one thing I do with my students, I do intentions, and they call it things to do. So they all have a voice, they all come to me eager to learn new things, but one thing that we always do is we sit down and we talk about the things to do for the day. They know what comes here. I was never able to do that with mine. And it's on silent. I was never able to do that in my other classes. You know, we had the routine written out and we couldn't deviate. But here, if they had come in, they know the intention, but if one of them raises their hand and says, oh, I have something special that I want to say, then they all can talk about it and offer their perspective about what that little friend has to say. This year, I have a very chatty group. They all have opinions, they all have something to say every morning, and sometimes I can barely hear my thoughts. So how do I manage that? I manage that with routine. I have clear expectations of the routine, but like I said, we do deviate because we're very chatty, but I do warm-up activities, and that gets their attention, and I use Scholastic videos a lot. Scholastic is great, and then especially we've gone over Earth Day, which is on Monday. They know all about the eclipse. So that is a really good resource that has helped me. Another thing is for student engagement. I send level books home from my own library. They're reading at home, and then they bring them back and we share them. We sit in a circle, we sit on the floor. I have these big chairs and they all like to cuddle in them. We do one-on-one if I need to listen to one, but nobody knows who's who. If there's a struggling reader, I pair it up with somebody that reads better. They all think they're great readers. Also, I have a little acrylic apple that I got off some Amazon or something, and it's catch somebody doing good for the whole classroom, so they can get up quietly, and then if somebody's focusing, working hard, they get up, get the little star, put it in the apple, and I do the same thing. But we don't name anybody. It's for the whole class. And then obviously we have a little celebration with a movie and some popcorn. Oh, okay, so
I think we went a little over.
time.
Yes, but we are supposed to end at 12:45. Thank you, Susan. I'm sorry. She did have some great other slides here.
That's okay.
Weekly quizzes. You can see immediate correction, adaptability, conferences. We were going to go over some of what
Oh, so sorry.
There we go. We're going to go over what some of your own challenges are and write them out. But since we're out of time and we're the only thing between you and lunch at this moment, it's probably better if you just have any questions for us. Anybody have any questions that you want to ask? Yes.
Okay, so this is for, I think it was Lindsay and then who last spoke, both having experience with special education students. What is the one, or I don't know, a handful of things that you wish for that you did not receive, maybe in the public school setting or before you came to, this hybrid model? What do you wish you got from your administration? All of it.
I would say in the public school setting, I wish that they would have shown us how to work with a co-teacher. Because we had special education teachers that were serving my students. In Florida, they were all pulled out. But in the same regard, they were only pulled out for math and ELA, and all the rest of the time they were with me. And I was given zero support on how to manage the behaviors. We had a lot of behavior intervention plans and things like that, and I felt kind of isolated. There wasn't enough support on how do I support these kids when they're in my classroom without that kind of special education teacher. And then in the same regard, later on when I taught fourth grade, again, I had a teacher that was pushing in, but it was very left up, like everything was left to me. Like she came in, took a group, but I had to do all the planning. So there wasn't enough on like, how do we work together? And there wasn't that time given so that we could sit
Like, we need time to sit and like, let's talk about our kids. And that wasn't built in into our schedule. And for me, that would have been really helpful. Just how do we work together as a team? Because we are a team. And if you don't give us time to sit and talk about our students together outside of like IEPs and like formal meetings, then we're never going to be successful in supporting those kids together.
And I'll just, one thing that I find it's really encouraging is I have a good relationship with the parents. Well, as a special ed teacher, they are very standoffish. The parents, unless they want something at the IEP, then they'll come and say, I have an advocate, I have the lawyer, I have this and like that for all the things they want. But here, the parents just bring me flowers or cookies or this, and we email each other, and they call me Susan, and I feel so good about that because and then when they have something to say, maybe not so good, we are quiet about it. We're not defensive. We say, hey, I need for you to help so and so with their spelling. They're not doing that great. So that is very refreshing. I enjoy that a lot.
Thank you so much.